Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing Disability into the Narrative and Onto the Bottom Line, part of our WIF Shorts Lab supported by Google. I'm Ebony Adams, Manager of Public Programs here at Women in Film. A short visual description of me is I'm a Black woman with short blonde hair, a blue outfit, and probably too much jewelry. I am excited to be here tonight to talk to some incredible folks working at the top of the game in entertainment and tech. We're going to be talking about efforts to address inequalities that keep disabled creatives and consumers off camera, offset, and out of the conversation. How will disability inclusion expand opportunities, ensure true access, and stir up innovation? Joining me for this discussion are four incredible women: writer-producer Catherine Bay, known for her work on NCIS New Orleans; Leslie Hennon, Entertainment and News Media Associate at Respectability, a disability-led nonprofit that works to create systemic change and how society views and values people with disabilities; KR Liu, Head of Brand Accessibility at Google, who works to drive change in disability inclusion and LGBTQ rights; and award-winning filmmaker Juliet Romeo, founder of Unstoppable Films Program. Thank you all so much for being here. Before we get started, I do want to let folks know that we're going to be taking audience questions. So please feel free to add those questions to the Q&A window at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You don't need to wait until the end to do that. You can toss those questions in the Q&A window at any point. Also, as you can tell, we do have an ASL interpreter here for access. So just to go ahead and get started here, I want to start off by kind of just like, throwing a grenade. So what are the areas that seem to be most resistant to change when we talk about disability inclusion, equal access? Sometimes when we have, in fact, I would say the majority of the time, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we are accustomed to saying we need to make sure that we're considering racial difference, gender difference. We need to make sure that we're, talking about, class and sexual expression, right? But disability is always the last thing on that list. There's always an addendum, and people, I don't think, really know what that means to be truly inclusive, along that axis. And so consequently, we haven't made nearly the gains that I think we should, right? So I would love to hear from all of you, and I'll just start with you, Leslie. Can you first start with maybe a short visual description of yourself, and then or tell us, where do you think, where we're being held up? What's the area where we can't seem to make headway?
Yeah. So hi everyone, I'm Leslie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And a visual description: I'm a white woman wearing brown glasses. I have dark brown, kind of wavy hair. And behind me is my living room and my kitchen. A lot of white walls. But yeah, great question. I think, one area that I think, going back to Respectability's overall mission is to create more employment opportunities for people with disabilities. And so I think it's just really one area where we're getting held up is some of these like negative stigmas and people maybe not, being hesitant about hiring people with disabilities. And then in entertainment specifically, that's, where the representation of people with disabilities ultimately affects how, we are treated in real life, how we experience the world itself. So there's just a lot of things to go into that. But again, as you mentioned, kind of recognizing that disability is an identity that there's a lot of intersectionality, it cuts across all other identities. And also accessibility is for everyone. So a lot of things that were, initially created by people in the disability community ultimately end up helping everyone. Just like one example that I was talking about with another coworker earlier was like texting. Texting was originally created to help deaf individuals communicate over the phone, but now everyone texts. And so it's something to, it's so ingrained in our society, but accessibility is really for everyone.
I love that. Thank you. Catherine, what about you? Where would you say, like, in your mind, one of the biggest holdups or, one of the biggest challenges that you see, like, this just seems like something we're having trouble getting past?
Hi guys, this is Catherine. I'm a white woman. I have shoulder length red hair. I'm wearing like a color blocked sweater, and behind me is my office that I'm now feeling self-conscious about because I didn't clean it before this panel. I'm very excited to be here. I think, like you said, Ebony, when you started we're seeing these huge gains in diversity, equity, and inclusion with other groups across the board. And I think in recent years, we've been like inching forward in disability representation, but most of that is in front of the camera. And it's usually one white man in a wheelchair. And then the production will say, great, we ticked that box. So, and everybody could see obviously that we did it. So problem solved. And that almost never extends to diverse representation in front of the screen, but more importantly, I think behind the camera. I don't know what it's like, some kind of mental block that people can't get past the fact that they think it's going to be too difficult, too expensive, too time consuming to hire disabled people, even though that's not the case. And I think like every disabled person that gets hired behind the camera is kind of like breaking down that wall a little bit more, because they just need to see us working to know that we actually can do it.
Great. Juliet, what about you? What's your take?
Hi everyone. I'm Juliet. I am a brown-skinned Black woman. I'm wearing my hair is black in curls and about past shoulder length. And I am also hiding a lot of mess strategically hiding a lot of mess in my messy office. So don't feel so bad, Catherine. But yeah, and I have a shelf with some awards and film, bric-a-brac. And it's great to be here. And I definitely agree with everything that everyone has already said. But I also want to mention that there's just this, especially behind the scenes, there seems to be this lack of patience. As a director myself, I sometimes feel this anxiety that there's just this impatience about me because I have a disability. And so then it kind of throws off my belief that I'm able to get this job done. And there's always this idea that I have to fight for everything, which can become very exhausting. And because there's so many isms in me, being a Black woman, and being Black, being a woman, being disabled, is like, come on. Like, so it's like really exhausting. And I think that if people will really just take the time to understand, like Leslie said, that we are all pretty much the same because it works for everyone, right? The accessibility and the adaptability that it takes to create a set that works for disabled filmmakers, actors, people that work behind the scenes, it ends up working out for everyone else. So it's just really frustrating. And I just kind of throw my hands up and I'm like, what is your problem? So, and then the gatekeepers that just kind of don't want to get past themselves really and say like, like these things are unfair and we really should open up and give these give opportunity to create a truthful and authentic narrative about what disability really looks like, and that's very broad. Mm-hmm. It's very different for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Catherine, you mentioned that, the sort of, archetypal image of disability on screen is a white man in a wheelchair, right? And there's this very singular view of what disability means and what it will require to include disabled people on camera, on set, in the workplace in general, in society. It's a very narrow view. But before we go into that, Kiara, I want to, ask you for your take as well. And, I'm so glad you're able to join this conversation because you have a very unique position, in the world of tech. And so I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, thank you, Ebony. I'm KR. I'm a white female with short blonde hair, actually brown, but it's blonde right now. Long bangs, wearing a black jacket, and I'm in my home office in Bellevue, Washington. I do come from a different perspective. Like I'm not in the film industry, but my role at Google is I lead a lot of our brand campaign efforts that the whole world sees, and especially in big moments. And we are focused on really paying attention not only to Google's history in product innovation, which is one part of it, right? It's great to talk about innovation and tools and how they're helpful for everyone, especially people with disabilities. But if people don't see themselves in the campaigns and the way you market and the way you storytell, right, that's not going to reach the people who may need these things the most. And so my job has really been to help our company and help the industry from a marketing brand perspective get better about many different things. Like, what are best practices when you're trying to create content that's inclusive and accessible? How do you look at intersectionality and authentic representation when it comes to disabled community? And to Juliet's point, right? Like, I'm not just a woman one day, hard of hearing the next day, and queer the next day. I'm those three things all day long. And it is exhausting, right? But it is important that we're thinking about all of those intersections, because when you do focus on disability, you're actually focusing on many different groups. And so it's important for companies and brands, and we're starting to see more and more of it on the tech side, recognizing that it's not just about product. It's about inclusion in content, in storytelling, in marketing. We're seeing brands like Nike, we're seeing brands like Netflix finally have heads of accessibility who come from the community themselves. That's the biggest important thing here. You need representation at the table who's making important decisions, leadership decisions that can help bring the community in when it's most important, especially in ways that you're going to be able to shift perception and culture, which is what we're trying to do here, right? It's not just about like, we go make a product, tell a story, and that's it, right? We want to actually shift people's perceptions of what disability is like. What disability really means to many different people in many different ways, how it impacts their family members and such. So I think the biggest barrier is people just don't know where to start. Really, it really is, oh, it seems hard, I'm not going to even try, right? So it's really important that in our industry, we're doing a better job of sharing our learnings. How do we do that? Doing case studies, working on focus groups, getting them to talk about like how we all work together to try to create the most authentic representation from programs to campaigns to content as much as we can. And we're not perfect as a company, but we're learning. We're at least admitting that we need to be better. And we've done a really great job of trying to be better about that. And so that's why it's important that we bring partners along with us from the community. And I think that's the biggest piece of advice that is really important here is bring people along. We've done a really good job of bringing more people with disabilities behind the camera, in front of the camera, and different spectrums of diversity throughout that.
I love that. The phrase in activism circles is, nothing for us without us. And so, one of the things that I love about Respectability is it's a disability-led organization, right? So, Leslie, I'd love to, have you talk about some of the work that you're doing to address the things that, all of you have mentioned so far. And, in particular, I would love for you to explain a little bit about the Hollywood Disability Inclusion Toolkit, because this is just one way that, people can, sort of like say, okay, I'm learning more, but here are tangible things that I can do, or here are resources. So if you could explain a little more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So, as you mentioned, the Hollywood Inclusion Toolkit, is one way that we are kind of helping to fight those stigmas. And but that was originally created in March 2018, and that was before I started working at Respectability. But I do know it took about 6 months to create. There were over 40 people involved, and each section of the toolkit there's like different specific disabilities that it covers. And each of those sections was either written by a person with that disability or reviewed by multiple people with those disabilities. And it really, serves as sort of a starting point, because we would often get the question of like, where do I start? I don't know anyone with a disability. And then we can turn around and say like, well, here is like all the ways that we can help connect you with disabled people who are working in the entertainment industry, other resources, because, acknowledging there are so many other individuals and organizations in the community that have been doing this work for years and years and years. And so pointing, people to these resources, where to find ASL interpreters, where to find live captioners, audio description. So it's really just a starting point of where we can direct people to all of these different resources of how, to even start going about inclusion in content creation, like all throughout the process. But yeah, so that eventually led to some of our consulting work, because once it's great to have this document, but people also need to know how to apply it. So that was some of our first studios that we worked with was NBC Universal and Disney were among the first ones, and so they reached out to sort of do some trainings with their teams about just generally disability inclusion 101, if you will, about how to sort of certain tropes to avoid, how to create an accessible set. And so those are really, we consult on every aspect of the process, whatever is going to help get more disabled folks hired into those rooms, onto those sets, behind the camera, in front of the camera, like, whatever people need. That's really where, we're there as a consultant, but also we want to get disabled people hired. So, and also just, we never want, like in a writer's room, one disabled person to have to feel like they have to speak for the entire community. So just knowing that we're always there as an additional resource for the writers or the showrunner to come to if they want some additional consulting. But yeah, that's sort of a brief overview.
Yeah, I love that. And so we will make sure to share the link to that toolkit so that folks can check it out. One thing that you mentioned at the tail end there was making sure that one person is not the voice, right, of the community. And Kara, you mentioned this as well, like, truly bringing people to the table means not making one person sort of responsible for all movement and being the one voice. And so I'm conscious as I ask you this, Catherine, I don't want to put you in that position, but I recognize that I imagine anyway, that you probably do have, a certain position in your field and are known for both who you are and the work that you do. So when, emerging writers and producers come to you who are themselves disabled and say, like, how did you get there? Or what can I do? What kind of advice are you giving them and how are you preparing them for, the world that currently exists? Because we don't just want to get people hired, right? We don't want to get them hired into an inequitable situation and then leave them floundering. So what are you doing to prepare them,
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and there's so many different paths that disabled people can take. I was very lucky in that I was able to work as an assistant for 8 years before I became a writer, and that path is not open to a lot of people with various disabilities. I myself use a wheelchair, but you're less likely to get hired as a showrunner's assistant if you're deaf or hard of hearing, for instance, because people think you can't answer their phone, that kind of thing. So I'm always encouraging people to look for those alternative paths, whether they're fellowships or professional experience outside of writing that you can bring into the room, add value that way. But then also just being very honest with people, and that it's very hard. It's hard for anybody. This is almost an impossible job to get, especially if you're disabled. You are likely going to be the only person in the room. You're gonna want to speak up, and you're gonna want to be that voice and defend your community and other communities who might not be represented. But you have to find that balance of, as a staff writer, are you going to speak up and risk your job, or are you going to stay quiet? I'm now a supervising producer, so I have a little bit more safety in saying those things. But so I always say, like, be strategic. So because you don't want to get your foot in the door and then get fired right away because you get a reputation. And it's really unfortunate, but there's so few people that are disabled people that are working in this industry that it's like right now I'm like, okay, we've got to play this game, right? So I oftentimes will suggest that people try really hard to form alliances with other people, with other non-disabled people in the industry, and kind of seek protection that way. And then my other piece of advice to people who are just starting out is, like, the only reason why this worked out for me is because I didn't give up. I never stopped trying. I don't have a plan B, and so it was going to be this or nothing else. And I just kept going until it worked out. And if you have the ability and the resources and the means, if you're lucky enough to have the means, just keep going, you know?
Love that. So Juliet, you mentioned earlier that, you know, you don't pick and choose. You cannot pick and choose which aspects of your identity are foregrounded in you. You are all of those things that you are at every moment. And so I would love to hear from you about, you know, I don't, maybe, you know, things that you're seeing that give you a little bit of hope, that you are challenged by, excited by, in terms of like authentic representations that really get at the heart of like the multiple intersections of identity that so many people, you know, have, but particularly, you know, as we mentioned, you know, in the disabled community, there is a face and a form to what we expect. So are you seeing things that excite you, and where are you seeing those things?
One of the major things that I'm seeing that's exciting me is the work that we're doing with Unstoppable, collaborating with Slam Dance and having this major festival really put a spotlight on disabled filmmakers and the work that we're all doing, not just as the filmmakers that have entered into the competition, but also our programmers. It's definitely, you know, for disabled filmmakers, by disabled filmmakers. All of our programmers also have disabilities. And so when these films come in, we have eyes on it that are completely authentic and know what they're looking at, you know, and have representation, as opposed to having people that are still trying to learn and understand. And but what has happened across the entire platform of Slam Dance is there was this really great, this awakening of, wow, here are some films and people and narratives and stories that we've never seen before, and we want more of that. And we were able to not only get closed captioning for Unstoppable, but across the entire Slam Dance competition. Now it is mandatory that closed captioning is part of the package going forward. And next, we're going to be tackling audio description, because my goal is to make it 100%, you know, accessible, you know, as whatever I can find that I feel the disabled community needs. I'm like, okay, that's the next thing that we're going to tackle. Just being able to, I've heard so many disabled filmmakers say that they could never attend a festival. And not only was that heartbreaking, but I definitely understood it because I've had my own struggles, you know, and as someone with a non-visible disability, I considered myself to have a little bit of privilege in that aspect, that I wasn't in a wheelchair, but that made me think to myself, what about people that are in wheelchairs, or, you know, are hard of hearing, or, you know, are blind? What is their struggle? Because I'm still struggling trying to make this happen for myself. So I really wanted to really build that table and bring everyone forward to it and see where we can go. And it's been our second year. It has been amazing. The amount of attention that we've gotten, and seeing that it has created this blueprint that other festivals want to emulate and copy. And I implore them to reach out to us, because we're willing to, you know, extend our hand and help everyone. We're also taking, in the line of accessibility, we're taking Slam Dance and we're bringing it to Miami so that there's more accessibility for people with disabilities. So I'm really excited for 2023.
Yeah, I want to, you know, circle back in a moment to that, you know, because I want to talk to you about, you know, what's the next step for programs like Unstoppable, because, you know, the hope is that we don't just get disabled filmmakers into these festivals, into these programs, but then they are able to, you know, actually complete their films, and then B, get distribution for those films, or they do get hired, right? We don't want them just creating in their basement, but then never actually being able to get
our very first year, our honorable mention was an Oscar nominated short. So we're on the right track, and I'm so proud of that. I'm just so proud that it's going in that direction, because it really does give me hope that people are seeing us. I do feel like this year it was almost in protest to demand these things, and to understand that still being in a pandemic, how hard I had to implore that do not forget about the disabled community. Like, everyone wants the world to open up, and I totally get it. But before 2020, we still had the same issues that everyone else is struggling with right now. And so even a space like this, like having this conversation on Zoom, was not something that would have been accessible for me. So I totally appreciate these opportunities. You know, it's helped me to build my platform in a way that the last 10 years did not.
Yeah.
So I really continue to want to, and with KR and technology, to continue to have these opportunities and to be able to go virtual, and do it in such a creative way that everyone wants to do it.
Yeah, I think, there is a real fear, and legitimate fear from not just, folks who are disabled, but people who are perhaps disabled and, parents or people who are disabled and caregivers, whatever, that we will go back into, a world in which working from home isn't as easily available or accepted. These kind of virtual conversations and the kind of, access that people have been granted during this pandemic is going to go away, and it will be hard to get them back because it's inextricably linked to this horrific thing, which is this pandemic, right? And we don't want to think about the pandemic anymore. So we're going to get rid of all of the benefits that have accrued during this period. So Kara, I want to talk to you about tech. So, you mentioned Zoom. And one of the things that, you work on is inclusive design. I would love for you to explain a little bit about what that is and how you and your team, work to really innovate in the space of, considering disability, accessibility, and innovation, and marrying all of those things. So, not doing it at, the last half hour of your day, but it's everything that you do. I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll give a great example of kind of the context that we're talking about when you're looking at film, right? So for me, before I even came to Google, I have severe hearing loss, and I'm very passionate about making, content and, anything auditory as accessible as possible. Because I'm a lip reader. I don't use sign language, but I depend a lot on captions. But often I wasn't seeing captioning available in a lot of like social media content, or, just being able to read a podcast while the podcast is being said. And so Google actually reached out several years ago to the community and said, hey, we have some captioning technology we'd love for you to look at. Give us your thoughts and feedback of what a dream product would look like. What's a feature you would like to see? And so that's how I ended up first at Google, was talking about the idea of what we call now live caption, where any audio device or in Chrome on your computer or in Google Meets, you have real-time captioning happening, being able to see what people are saying, right? And that includes like if I'm listening to music on my phone, if I'm doing a podcast, right? And that was the first product that I actually did with Google, but also they told the story of like why that was important to our community, like really being authentic in that. Fast forward to a pandemic, you now are thrown in a virtual situation where you need to have those types of tools to be able to communicate, right? And the fact that we had created those became very much something everyone was starting to use. And to go back to your point on remote work, if anything in the tech industry, it's shown we can now hire more disabled people because now we have remote work as an option, and it's now a part of our culture, right? So like we have remote work, we changed the way that we allow people to work from wherever they want in the country and the world that was best for them. And so if anything, innovation and accessibility, along with the pandemic, along with something that the disability community has been asking for forever, it was kind of the perfect storm to show we have this innovation, we have accessibility features that can be helpful, and disabled people want to work. And so now there's no excuse. We were going into a remote work world and it's possible. Fast forward on that, the captioning tool that at Google that's been worked on for Google Meets was actually a Googler. He is a coder. His parents are Chinese immigrants who are deaf, and he often signed for them. And so captioning was kind of his personal pet project. So during the pandemic, he wasn't able to see them. He had a newborn son, and he just did this kind of authentic film himself about like what it means to him to stay connected, showing his parents like what's happening with their new grandson, how he's had to communicate with them throughout his lifetime, but also during the craziness of a pandemic. And we turned that into a mini commercial film, right? Because it was his story we wanted to tell, and we aired it at the Oscars. We gave it the biggest platform we could. We partnered with ABC to do closed captioning audio description for a live event. That shows a full circle of innovation, disability community, intersectionality, how we're bringing everyone together. But before we even launched that coder film, we had many people from the community come and take a look at it and go, we want to make sure we're being authentic in the storytelling. This is Tony's story, and we're giving him a platform. But we want to make sure that there's anything else we should be thinking about in this piece of content. So that was really important to us. But that just goes to show like the whole flywheel effect of how innovation and culture and that can be applied to many different areas that we all care about, whether that's film, music, photography, all those things. That's really important to us, right? Is how are we providing a stage to have these cultural conversations that impact our disabled community? And then how are we talking about innovation that's important to keep in mind as we go through this, but it's not the only thing, right? It's not just about a product that does a function to help someone. It's really about the person, what they're all about, what do they care about, what are they passionate about? And then there are tools that can support that passion, right? And so that to me was really important coming to Google, was like, get away from the product function and like, let's talk about how we impact society, and how do we talk about the things people really love to do and enable people to do that. And so that's been really, really fulfilling and exciting to see. So that does give me hope, right? That big brands are starting to recognize that those types of conversations and innovations are important, becoming more part of mainstream. And so now you're seeing a huge rise in like accessibility, disability, right? But again, it's important that we continue to not let them say, okay, you did one commercial and you're good. Like that's not enough. We have to continue to do the work and continue to show how you educate people on how to do good work and how you bring in the right people to the table when you're doing that. And so I'm excited to see more content out there. It's great that things are getting nominated for Oscars, but I want to also see more diversity, more in front of the camera, more behind the camera work. And we have a ways to go, but I feel like we're getting there. And that's exciting to me.
Fantastic. So one of the things that happens in these conversations is that I wind up asking all of my questions and I never get to the audience questions. I'm not going to do that this time because I see questions popping up in the Q&A, in the chat window. I'm going to help y'all out, and I'm going to actually pose these questions to the panelists who have given up their time. And then if there's time, I will ask more about it. So I'm going to start with one here. This is from someone who's anonymous, which is fine. Do you have any advice for disclosing disabilities that may not be visible? Now, this is huge, right? Because not everybody wants to disclose. This question is posed as optional in many job applications, and though it's illegal to discriminate in practice, it can be scary to ask for the accommodations needed. And this points to something that you were mentioning, Catherine, which is that it is incredibly hard in any field to be the greasy, the squeaky wheel, right? But particularly in the entertainment industry, when you've had to claw to get into that writer's room or to get onto that set, do you really want to make noise and say, hey, I need this accommodation? So I would love to open this up to anyone. Anyone can take this. Yeah, Kara.
Yeah, I would like to say it's a great question. Having severe hearing loss, people have no idea I had severe hearing loss because I'm a great lip reader and I can work my way through. But for the longest time in the tech industry, I didn't talk about it. I basically hid it because for that reason, I thought I want to get hired. I would have to like, not get promoted. I wouldn't get opportunities. And at some point you're going to get revealed, right? So I did have a brick wall moment where I did have to like talk about my hearing loss. It was becoming obvious. I couldn't hide it anymore. But it's really important that you're truly yourself. You talk about all the things about who you are, what you need to be successful. And if a place you're applying to doesn't want to take you for all those things, then you probably don't want to work there. And so I feel like it's really important that you're open and honest, but also offer education, right? And I know that's a lot of work on ourselves to have to constantly do that. But I think that is important to share, like, here's who I am. These are the ways that I need support or would like to be accommodated, and educate them. And a lot of times they're like appreciative of that. And so that would be my advice, is like, I wouldn't want someone not to hide a part of who they are and get a job. And then they do find out you have a disability, and then you're in a company that's not supportive. That would be a waste of your talent, right? You really want to be somewhere that appreciates all of you.
Yeah, and if I can jump in on that quickly too, just something from for an employer's perspective too is something, asking people, what do you need to do your job the best that you can possibly do? Because that way it's not looking at things like you're not forcing someone to disclose if they don't want to, but it gives the person an opportunity to say, oh, I need X, Y, and Z. And so I think that's a great way to sort of take off this. It doesn't feel like as an employee, I have to disclose something that I don't necessarily want to disclose, but I can ask for what I need to do my job. And so I think that's one thing for employers to think about, in the interview process or just in general. Also, like in the day-to-day work environment, whether it's an office environment or a showrunner or you're on set, just again, asking people and checking in, because that might change day to day what people need. So just being flexible and open to what people need to do their jobs.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you mentioned something before about how many things that are created or developed specifically for disabled people wind up being of use to everyone, right? And it's the same thing in a work environment. You can be a supervisor, a manager, a director, and set up an atmosphere in which these things that one person might need will be beneficial to everyone. And that way no one needs to disclose these things. But yeah, I would love to hear from Catherine and Juliet too, if you have an opinion on that.
Sure. My experience is much like KR's. I didn't disclose my disability for a long time. Now I use a wheelchair, but for many years when I was starting in television, I didn't. And it was awful. I really wish I would have, made that jump earlier. But I definitely get the fear of like, even now I'm like, I'm going to get fired if they find me out, like obviously, like everybody can see me and I still have that fear. Right. But I think if you do choose to disclose, something that you can do is be very upfront, like, this is my disability. This is exactly what I need to do my job. This is what you're going to have to do to accommodate. A lot of people, a lot of employers think, oh, it's going to be so difficult to accommodate this person because they're disabled. But if you ask me what I need, I'm like, nothing, like really nothing. Like, I'll like, now that I have a chair, I'm good. Like before I would have loved to sit down, but it's really not that big of a deal. And then also, like, if you can you play into your strengths with your disability, offers that as well. Like I get approached a lot for jobs or for things like this because I am disabled, because I have a different point of view. And, I'll oftentimes be like, well, my internalized ableism is going to benefit you because I will work 3 times as hard as anybody here at this job. So you're going to get a great worker to hire me, and I think that's the key thing, is that like so many disabled people want to work. And so you just need to figure out, if you choose to disclose, by no means do you need to, how to really make that part of your sales pitch, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I was going to pretty much say the same thing, Catherine. For me, when I would apply for jobs and I would get to the interview portion, I was honest about having a disability because it's not visible and you just never know when sickle cell will strike. So I needed people to know so that I could do my job better if I am always feeling my best, right? And so one of the things about that too is I have to, like Catherine was just saying, is about the internal ableism and that you're always kind of this overachieving of it. But I look at it as preparation. I have to prepare for everything I do because I know that there's things out there in the world that I need that I may not have access to. And if I don't, that could be pretty detrimental to me. So I have to make sure it's my responsibility that I have it. So for me, it's like, hey, I'm going to need to always have access to an electrical outlet so that I can charge my portable oxygen. I'm going to, need to make sure that, I'm not in a space where it's excessively hot or excessively cold or something like that. I'm going to need to be able to have access to water because I need to have fluids. So things that I'm asking for, or having to sit down, or I can't walk, for too long. And I think that once I've told people this, and they think, oh, that's not hard. Yeah, sure, you can have an outlet. Sure, you can sit over here. There's a charger, blah, blah, blah. So, I found people to be very helpful. I'm not saying I haven't had my horror stories. That's a whole nother documentary I'm working on. But yeah, I do feel that just being honest about myself and what I need makes it easier for me. I always tell the story where I kind of had this wake up call. I went to a film festival that I was screening in, and there were some panelists on stage, and I was sitting in front, and my oxygen was making this buzzing sound, and I turned it off. And all of a sudden, my oxygen was dropping, and I was like, "Are you trying to kill yourself so that you're not disturbing anybody? Like,
Right.
What is this doing? What are you doing to yourself?" And at that moment, when I decided to just be true to who I was and be okay with the fact that I wear oxygen, and yeah, this machine is going to buzz, so talk louder. People embraced me, my disability, and the bravery that I had to continue to do the work that I'm doing in spite of. And so I think that it's just very important to just not tell the truth for truth's sake, but for your sake, because lying about what you need is only going to hurt you.
Right. This next question is related to that, and it's about, where do we start, and, what are the realistic changes we can ask for? So this is a question from Jennifer, who asks, the current structure of filmmaking/TV production is inherently ableist and discriminatory against anyone with issues exacerbated by long hours, fatigue, regular medical visits, the need for consistent medical insurance, etc. How can we create opportunities for filmmakers when the fundamental structure is exclusionary? And how can we realistically help reshape the process to make it accessible? And I throw that to anyone who's got some thoughts.
I don't know what practical steps we can take, but I will just say, in this Zoom world that we're in now, like I found myself wondering this morning if a lot of shows were going to go back to in person, even part-time, because there's an argument to be made of like, oh, the Zoom room isn't great, like we'd rather be in person. And I get it, I don't like the Zoom room either, but in the past 2 years, I have found myself and the people that I work with have gotten very used to having their own schedules, very used to being flexible, very used to going to the grocery store in the middle of the day. And everybody's realized that you don't have to sit in a room for 8 to 10 hours a day, like doing the one thing. Like, I think now that people see that, like, we don't have to like kill ourselves for these jobs, whether you're disabled or not. I hope that will open up more opportunities. It remains to be seen, but I'm choosing to be optimistic on that front.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say also, we need more disabled people at the higher levels, disabled showrunners, disabled executives, disabled people really, recreating these systems that are inherently ableist. And so, if you have a disabled showrunner, they're going to be more in tune with like, okay, we're going to build in breaks. There's no need for us to work 16-hour days on the set. You know, I think a lot of it is getting disabled people to those higher levels and, you know, kind of recreating things from the top down. But yeah, and I think a lot of it also goes back to what Juliet was saying earlier about everyone just having a little more patience with each other. And, you know, I think all of that is sort of connected, but that's something I would love to see more of, is just more disabled people at higher level positions.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the asking ourselves the question of who do the current structures actually benefit? Who were they built for? So we know that, you know, long hours in a writer's room, for instance, that privileges or traditionally has privileged, you know, dudes who have, you know, wives at home who take care of the family and, you know, they're able to work these long hours. But everyone else wasn't from that mold, was getting screwed by that model, right? So asking like, okay, who actually built the system? Who benefits from it? And is that what we want to keep replicating, you know, and being honest about those things? Yeah. So I have a question here from Stephanie. She's saying, as a documentary filmmaker, I do include closed captioning and audio description for my films, but what's the best way to convince funders for those experiences? Excuse me, for those expenses? Does anybody have any advice there? Or resources that you can go check out?
Yeah, I mean, I would even say like, even within marketing and brand budgets, they're like, oh, so I gotta set aside funding to support all of that when my content is getting ready to, you know, go get cut and be launched, right? And making sure that it's accessible. And I just always say, well, you know how many millions of people you're gonna leave out of even enjoying your content if you don't make it accessible. And then just use hard data. I mean, literally, that is the best thing to do, is show the data, show who you're leaving out when you don't include those things, because closed captioning, for example, everyone uses that, not just someone like myself. Everyone uses it. You have a spouse sleeping next to you. You want to keep watching your show. Like you have a baby sleeping, or you don't want to wake people. I mean, you're on a train and you're trying to like watch an important clip, but you don't have your headphones. There are so many situations where those types of accommodations in the content are super helpful, increase viewership. I mean, I can go on for days about that. But I mean, that's the best argument, is to show the data of when you don't, this is who you leave out, and this is like the audience you lose. And it's only going to gain you more people. And they've shown that adding captioning actually allow people actually watch the video content more likely all the way through if it does have captioning. So that's one piece of advice I would say works often.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so next question is from Catherine. She says, what are the potential gains and losses for people with disabilities working in entertainment as the industry rebuilds from the pandemic? I've heard of some advantages that have come from accessibility caused by COVID adaptation, but as people race to shed mask and vaccination requirements, will that leave even more people behind? I think, you know, we've gotten at that a bit when we've talked about the ability to, you know, have remote work, right? But what are the other things that are you seeing, you know, in your jobs and your day-to-day work, you know, a sense that we are, you know, perhaps racing back or heading back too quickly to the before times?
I think that it's those people who don't necessarily have to think about the consequences of not wearing a mask or not getting vaccinated that are excited to rush back into before. We're never going back there, but they just are seeking that sense of normal that they had. You know, much like what Leslie was saying about having disabled people in positions of power, I think those are going to be the people that are going to like hold on to the gains that we've had. So if you know of disabled people who are creating content, or, you know, support them, watch their shows, you know, listen to their music, all that, we need to raise the profile. Like I'm just thinking like Ashley Eakin, and she's a disabled director, and she had a film drop on Netflix yesterday. Like everybody should go at the end of this panel and watch that Netflix film, and then like email Netflix and be like, wow, that was great. You know, so like so that's the way we're going to get more disabled directors who then are going to think about those accessibility things and just build them into their productions.
Okay.
Ashley Beacon is another Unstoppable alum. We love her. So yeah, she's amazing.
Okay, so Jennifer's got another question here. If you could design an accessible and inclusive set/process from scratch, what would it look like? And I assume it would be different for all of you, but what are some things that you would include?
I can jump in on that one. I think, we love to, at Respectability, emphasize the point of like really just a set is just a big open box. So you're really starting from scratch. And it can start as simple as, making sure you have accessible restrooms on site, making sure all of the door frames are wide enough for a wheelchair to fit through. Having a designated area on set that's kind of like a quiet room for anyone that might need some space to just sort of decompress throughout the day. Definitely using ramps versus stairs. And again, that's something that's going to help everyone on set. Wheelchair users can use a ramp. Also, the wardrobe people or people that are lugging heavy equipment, they're not going to want to lug it upstairs. A ramp is going to help them too. But yeah, I think really just looking at a set as this big open box and like a chance to sort of design something that is going to be accessible for everyone is a really great way to start. But yeah, those are just a few places.
Catherine, what about you?
I think another thing that people can do when they're, building sets and spaces that we're working in is make it clear that people should feel comfortable coming to you with their access needs. Just make that a blanket statement. Don't be like, hey, disabled employees, please like come this way, right? Just say, here, let me know if there's anything that you need to do your job better. And whether that's you need a disability accommodation or like you're a single mom and you need to take off, Thursday at 3 to go to a soccer game. Like people should just make that a blanket policy and like, okay, let's find out what we need to do our jobs smoothly at the start so we can address all of those things at the beginning and then we're off and running and don't have to like worry about getting to a situation where, oh my gosh, we can't get our talent up the stairs because we didn't think about getting an accessible dressing room.
Also, just to add on that, there's hire a production accessibility coordinator on set. So having a dedicated person or a dedicated team is even better, of where everyone on set, actors and crew, know that they can go to this person, and ask for their accommodations, and you have someone sort of keeping track of who needs what and when they need it. And also making sure you hire this person from the start so they can be with you for like location scouting and just sending out call sheets in dark mode or just little things like that, but really having a team of people that are dedicated to ensuring access needs are met for everyone on set. So that's, again, you're not asking people to disclose if they don't want to, but it's just saying, hey, we're here, let us know what you need to do your job.
Are there groups like there are for intimacy coordinators that people can go to say, like, I need to hire an accessibility coordinator for my production?
I know Indivisible is one organization that does this. And I know there's a bunch of people out there that are doing that work. So they're out there.
Yeah, there's also the 1 in 4 coalition is really trying to push for more accessibility coordinators as well. And I can't believe we didn't think about having this position before. It just is such a brilliant idea. And I want to see them on every set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, actually, I just recently got to a film here in Miami, and my challenge to myself is to have a fully accessible set so that I can prove to everyone that you can do it on an independent film level, so that now there is no excuse why major production companies with big budgets cannot get it done. So I definitely will be reaching out to a lot of those resources you guys just mentioned, because I'm definitely looking to see which is the best way to do that. It would be my first time, even as someone that is a disabled filmmaker, to even have been on an accessible set.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So KR, you don't work on, film or TV sets, but, if you were building an accessible and inclusive workplace from scratch, what would you prioritize?
Actually, we do a lot of film sets. Everything from our team does Google's year in search campaign every year. We do commercials, we do ad campaigns, we do photo shoots and all of that. We actually, over the last couple of years, have started putting guidelines in place for how to have an accessible set, how to hire a disabled crew, how to make sure there's accommodations for the cast that are disabled so that they have the accommodations they need. And so we've gotten a lot better about that and created guidelines internally that we have all of our cast and our film teams follow. So it's interesting, people don't know, like Google actually does a lot of content in the filming ad world. So we make sure now that we're being inclusive, especially when the content is around disability. So but we're being a lot more conscious of, like, it doesn't need to be disability themed to be doing those things. Like, everything we do needs to be accessible and inclusive. And when it comes to the workplace, same thing, making sure people have the accommodations that they need. And from the moment that they're contacted, or they contact us to apply for a job, we make sure that they have a checklist of accommodation options for them throughout the entire process, and then once they're onboarded as well.
Yeah. We've got a question here asking, is there any chance that it would be that you could share those guidelines?
I highly recommend some of the groups that we work with. One of them being Levant Consulting, we work with a lot, and they provide a really awesome group of a team that helps in accommodations in a lot of those sets. So I can share their link in the chat.
Awesome. This has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you all so much for being here. This is the first of many conversations we'll be having along these lines this year. I want to make sure that folks know this is not the only time that we're going to mention disability. And this is also not the only time that we will have disabled creatives. You know that, we want to make sure that we are not asking these people to just be their disability and just speak on it. Often people get tired of being an activist. They just want to be a writer. They just want to be a producer. They just want to be a director. But I want to thank you all for sharing all of your incredible insights on this panel this evening. We're going to be sending a recap, so we'll try and capture all of the things that were mentioned during the conversation tonight in case you missed them. We'll be putting the video up of this panel on our YouTube channel, and we'll make sure that the closed captions are available for everyone. But yeah, just thank you all so much for being here. My amazing guests, Catherine Beatty, Leslie Hennon, Juliet Romeo, KR Liu. Thank you all so much for being here. And thanks to the audience for being here as well.